For years, when Lois Lane had her own comic book series, she was given a title that sounded flattering, but when you actually stop and think about it, it wasn't. Superman's Girlfriend. This was done to make clear the connection between the Man of Steel and this plucky girl reporter, but it gave the impression that without Superman, she didn't have much value at all. It was a strange way to describe one of the most driven journalists in fiction, a woman whose entire profession revolves around questioning power and dragging uncomfortable truths into the light. Those comics weren't trying to erase Lois Lane's intelligence, they were just trying to package it. Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, was a comic book designed for a young female readership, and so its stories revolved around the concerns publishers believed girls should have. Romance, rivalry, domestic aspiration, the fear of being left behind. Journalism existed, but it was rarely the engine. Love was. In that context, Lois wasn't the driven reporter we recognise today. She was anxious, romantic, frequently reactive, and not because she lacked drive, but because the stories were never allowed to follow it where it naturally led. Her ambition was redirected inwards towards securing affection rather than exposing power. And that framing stuck. It's almost impossible to think of Lois Lane without immediately thinking of Superman alongside her, even now. Across decades and interpretations, Lois was often treated as an accessory, the person waiting to be saved, the love interest Superman earns once the city is secure and the smoke has cleared. Granted, that wasn't always the case, but it happened often enough for it to become the default. Superman the Animated Series did what the older comics rarely did though. It let Lois Lane exist outside of romance, giving her agency first and love later. From the moment Lois appears, she's framed as an independent force, clever, relentless, and captivating. Time and again, entire episodes hinge not on Superman throwing a punch, but on Lois asking the right questions and drawing the right conclusions. Superman may be bulletproof, but Lois Lane moves the plot. This version of Lois isn't defined by who she loves, she's defined by what she refuses to tolerate. The powerful abusing their privilege, authority going unchallenged, truth buried under convenience, and the fact that her romance with Superman doesn't fully arrive until the very end isn't accidental, it actually really emphasises their point. The STAS creative team wasn't interested in presenting Lois Lane as someone orbiting Superman, they were interested in showing why she stands beside him on her own terms. If the writers wanted to convince us that Lois Lane is more than Superman's girlfriend, they did so in the most telling way possible, by letting her do her job. In STAS, Lois Lane understands who benefits from a story, who gets buried by it, and who would very much prefer she stopped asking questions. Her journalism, more often than not, drives the plot forward. Take her first appearance in the 3-part premiere, The Last Son of Krypton. She charges headfirst into danger, revealing that the battlesuit theft had been staged. Again and again, Lois is the character who uncovers the truth first. She follows the paper trail, confronts the wrong people, and walks into danger armed with nothing but a notebook and a refusal to back down. Superman can stop heavily armed gunmen in a second, but he can't expose corruption, unravel conspiracies, or hold institutions to account in the same way that Lois can. And crucially, this isn't presented as a weakness for Superman, his partnership with Lois is a strength. The danger that Lois puts herself in isn't here to make Superman look better, it indicates that in Metropolis the truth is inconvenient and often dangerous. Despite this, Lois's role is to insist on it anyway. In that sense, she functions as the human counterweight to Superman's power. He can lift cities, she can ask questions those cities would rather go unanswered. And when the two work together, it isn't hero and girlfriend, it's muscle and meaning, strength and scrutiny. Before the romance ever develops, the partnership is already complete. Lois's importance has nothing to do with romance at all. It's built on competence, conviction, and the simple fact that she operates in spaces Superman can't. By the time the two of them share a meaningful glance, the show has already done the real work, establishing Lois as essential on her own terms. And I don't want to suggest that Lois Lane is some chaste paragon of virtue. It's clear that there is chemistry between the two. But instead of having her run into Superman's arms at the first opportunity, the show holds back because romance isn't the point. At least not yet. Lois has several relationships throughout the series, and all of them feed back into her eventual relationship with Superman. Once they establish that Lois Lane doesn't exist to orbit Superman, her romantic subplots start to read very differently, and some of them go down quite different paths. Lois's romances function less like wish fulfillment and more like an X-ray. Each relationship strips something bare, revealing not what Lois wants, but what she will not tolerate. And actually calling these relationships love stories feels like I'm overdoing it. Really, they're stress tests applied to men with power, influence, mystery, or authority, and more often than not, they fail. The show is very comfortable pairing Lois with men who are very clearly wrong for her. And I think that each flirtation and near miss exists to outline a boundary. Obsession is not devotion, secrecy is not depth, control is not care. They repeatedly place Lois in situations where the wrong man offers her affection, and each time she steps back. Importantly, the series never treats this as a failure on her part. There's rarely a sense that Lois is unlucky in love or blind to what's right in front of her face. Instead, the pattern suggests discernment. She is testing the shape of a relationship before she allows it to define her, and more often than not, she decides the shape is wrong. Lois Lane's love seems to be something that has to survive examination, and very few things do. So let's just quickly go down through some of her love interests from the show, starting with a relationship that ended before the series began, but its influence could still be felt. Now, they never outright say this, but I think that Lex Luthor's interest in Lois Lane was less about affection and more about control. Unlike the other men who drift through Lois's orbit, Lex doesn't idolize her and he doesn't mystify her. He recognizes her intelligence, her influence, and her proximity to Superman, and he treats all three as resources to be managed. His courtship seemed more strategic than anything else. And that's not to say that he didn't care about her at all. He agreed to help her identify her murderous stalker, let's not forget. But I think he was more drawn to her influence above anything else. Ultimately, Lex didn't want a partner, he wanted a variable under his control, and as soon as Lois saw that, she dumped him. She recognizes that a life alongside him would require silence, compromise, and eventual complicity. To accept his affection would be to surrender the very instincts that define her, and so she moves on. This tells us that Lois isn't necessarily attracted to power, she's wary of it, especially when it asks to be trusted, and that acts as a perfect segue to her most significant lover in the series, Bruce Wayne. Bruce doesn't try to control Lois, he doesn't appraise her or bargain with her, instead he fascinates her. He offers mystery, restraint, and the promise of depth, and he's the kind of man who seems to be holding something back and therefore invites curiosity. For a moment that feels like intimacy and the two genuinely seem to connect, so much so that she's willing to pack up and move to Gotham to be closer to him. She's drawn to him because he appears to be controlled and fundamentally human in a way that Superman sometimes isn't. But she fell in love with his mask. Batman is who he really is. And once she learns the truth, she can't handle it. And to be clear, Batman wasn't being cruel or manipulative because he genuinely liked her too. But there are parts of him that are non-negotiable. His identity, his emotions, even his motivations remain carefully curated. And for someone whose entire life is built around exposing the truth, that kind of emotional withholding is untenable. The relationship simply can't progress because it has nowhere to go. Mystery can intrigue, but it can't sustain trust. In this sense, Batman becomes another lesson in what Lois Lane is not looking for. She doesn't want dominance or emotional distance, she wants someone who is emotionally present, open and supportive. So this relationship ended because Lois refused to settle. There's a wonderful moment in the episode The Demon Reborn where Lois Lane is impersonated by Talia al Ghul. Batman finds Lois knocked out at her apartment and helps her recover. Lois reveals that there have been times where she has doubted her choice to end their relationship, that some nights she thinks about picking up the phone and trying again. She asks him if he ever felt that way too and turns around to find that, shock horror, he's already gone. It's utterly devastating and such a perfect Batman moment. By the time we've seen Lois with Batman and Lex Luthor, the pattern is pretty clear. She doesn't respond to secrecy, she doesn't respond to control, she doesn't respond to charm or intimidation. What she does respond to is presence, honesty, engagement, and the courage to meet her on equal terms. Batman fascinates her, but he withholds. Lex impresses her, but he contains. Both fail because they don't see what Lois values. She is a constant measure of whether someone with influence can wield it responsibly. And this is where the DCAU's alternate universe offers another important lesson. In the episode Brave New Metropolis, we see a Superman who never risked emotional honesty with his Lois and lost her after she was killed by Intergang. Grief and loss, the constant thought of what might have been, twist his power into something authoritarian. He is strong, capable, and terrifying, and he is unrecognizable. It's the culmination of everything the other failed romances hint at. When connection is deferred, ignored, or weaponized, even the most heroic figures can become dangerous. The very forces Superman is meant to protect can turn into instruments of control when emotional accountability is absent. For the real Superman, the message is unambiguous. To earn Lois's affections, he must show up fully. He must speak. He must listen. He must risk being vulnerable. Only by learning from the failures of those around her does he finally become the man who can stand beside her on equal footing. And only then does the delayed romance make sense as the culmination of mutual respect, trust, and presence. In Superman the Animated Series, Lois Lane isn't defined by who she loves. She defines the men around her, and in doing so, she defines the stakes of the world they inhabit. Her intelligence, courage, and unwillingness to compromise are character traits that act as a lens through which power is measured. Lex Luthor, Batman, and Superman are each tested against her presence, and each fails in different ways until the very end, when the only relationship that survives is built on mutual respect and honesty. That delayed romance is the logical conclusion of everything the series has been showing us about her from the start. That love is meaningful only when it emerges from equality, trust, and accountability. Lois is never a prize to be won, she is a force in her own right. And perhaps that's the show's most enduring lesson. It isn't raw strength that defines a hero, but the presence of someone like Lois Lane. The person who holds heroes to account and reminds them what it means to act with courage and integrity. Okay, that's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time. When I return on Monday, I'm going to follow up on one of my earliest videos. I've talked about how Two-Face Part 1 is the best episode of Batman the Animated Series, but I had skipped over the second part. Well, now it's time to talk about that and how it delivers a wild ride of tragedy, chaos, and moral collapse. And next Friday, I'm jumping back into my recent Justice League villain poll to talk about the witch Circe, her mythological origins, how she was used in the comics, and the dramatic interpretation of her in Justice League Unlimited. Hope to see you then.